The QMC Board and Collar Series for EMS professionals welcomes you to Excuse My Medic, the podcast version of an MCI with Gary Harvat, Chuck Humphrey, and Ed Marasco. Excuse My Medic takes a unique look at today's emergency medical service with news and information, opinionated discussions, lively talk, sporadic jabs, and even a few belly laughs from our world of emergency medical services. Excuse My Medic is brought to you by Quick Med Claims, a national leader in emergency medical service revenue cycle management and reimbursement consulting. Now, hang on to the bench seat and tighten your lap belt as these old guys from EMS past take you on a Code 3 ride without touching the brakes. You've had the disclaimer, and if you're still brave enough to stick it out, let's get started. Take it away, guys.
And welcome to another rousing edition of Excuse My Medic, or as we call it, EM2. We are so excited for today's program, and of course joining me are my great colleagues, Chuck Humphrey, who's up in northeastern Pennsylvania, and of course down south of us in that little town of Hilton Head is my good friend and colleague, Ed Marasco. Guys, how you doing this morning?
Oh,
fantastic.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yep. Well, that's great. Hey, I have to tell you, I know we've talked about this many times before, but guess what I did yesterday, guys?
Open the pool.
Open the pool.
Oh, Gary.
This is something that I live for, and as our listeners know, this is the bane of my existence, this darn pool. So, of course, if you could look out this window behind me here, you would see something that looks kind of like a turquoise greenish type of water vessel. But it's getting better since yesterday. And of course, you know, the cover, the chemicals, the pump, priming this, getting that, chlorine, all this other stuff for absolutely. Yeah. Although I will tell you this. One person was in the pool last year, and it was me.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
One person. I fell in the pool. So that counts, right? I fell in the darn pool.
But, Gary, I don't want to rub it in, but when I look out my back window, there's this lovely, barely traceable patch where a couple dump trucks took care of that problem for me.
Yeah, right.
And I think I've told you both this before. If it was up to me, that thing would be a tomato patch in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But of course, when we bought this house back in the early 90s, it had, a beautiful in-ground pool. Oh, sexy, great. The kids will love it. Well, guess what? There's no kids.
They're all gone.
They're all gone.
Doesn't Terry actually get in it at all? She doesn't swim in the summer?
Oh, well, if you want to classify this, Ed, she uses it. Use of the pool is called taking the chaise lounge out, wine, and a table, and sitting on the cement sidewalk around the pool.
Yes.
There you go. God. All right. So anyway, so you guys have been okay. Chuck, how about you, buddy?
Yeah, everything. We have a lot of moving going on in my family. My oldest daughter is just sold her house yesterday and is changing communities. Her husband is a minister, and he was reappointed to a new church, which is in our town. So we'll have them here in our backyard. My youngest daughter is going to change location. So she's getting ready to move from an apartment to a house. And in between there, she's going to do a stint of cohabitating with us for a little bit. And my wife's middle son is about ready to pack up the truck in Albuquerque and move to York, Pennsylvania. So we will have all children within driving distance, which is making my spouse extremely happy, I can tell you.
That's good stuff.
Yes, well, indeed.
I don't know. The kids are moving back with you and Brenda. Brenda, no problem.
No.
God bless them.
Yeah.
I hope they can tolerate being with Dad again.
A few months in transition, we'll be fine. That's for sure.
Yeah, we'll see. I'll give her a call right after about a month or so, see how it's going. So, Ed, your family's doing well?
Yeah, all good. Just got back from Disney World, had all the kids, and and the 2 grandbabies. So I needed a break. I needed 2 days to recover after that. I think we put about 16,000 steps on a day going through the
Wow.
parks and
Yep.
all that stuff. But it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. It was the first time, they're 3 and 2. So
Great.
it's a great age.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Great. Well, Ed, I'm going to let you do the honors here because, next week being EMS week, we have a very special show today, and it's something we've had guests before, but I think today is going to be extraordinary because the gentleman we have, and again, I'll let you do the honors, is a guy who was there on day one. And when we talk about EMS, especially in Eastern United States, well, it might be across the country, we tend to look at one group that got it all started, and we are fortunate today to have a member of that group. So without any further ado, Ed, I'll let you take it over and introduce our guests.
It's a privilege, and I can't thank John enough. Today, folks, we have John Moon, who, as most of you know out there in listener land, is one of the pioneers in EMS in this country. And John was a part of a little outfit called Freedom House here in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh for many years, and got it all started with the first true paramedics out there in the field, working with some giants of healthcare. And John and I have talked about that a few times. Some of the people we had a chance to work with, who maybe are a little bit behind the scenes for some folks. And then John went on to be one of the senior leaders of Pittsburgh EMS for many years, and most recently put together a book about his experience with Freedom House and all those wonderful days and great memories, which was a thrill. If you haven't read it, you need to get it and read it. But John, thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
It's a privilege and an honor to be here, Ed. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. And, as Gary mentioned, it's EMS week next week. This is the 50th anniversary of the official celebration of EMS week, which is one of those things that kind of snuck up on me, at least. I was thinking about it the other day. Some formal recognition for the folks out in the field. John, you've been doing this for a long time. Yeah, give us your perspective about sort of the history of EMS and the celebrations and all that sort of stuff.
Well, you're right. It's been a journey, and one of the things that I've been proud of most is the accomplishments as being a part of that journey. It began back in the early '60s and ended up concluding in 2009 when I retired from the city of Pittsburgh EMS. But oftentimes, as I'm doing now, is I'm more or less traveling around the country talking about the history of EMS, which began right here in Pittsburgh by an organization known as Freedom House Enterprise. And my concern with that part of history is that it's been dormant for well over 50 plus years. And once I, had a time on my hand to retire, I kind of went on this mission, if you will, to kind of resurrect this part of history. And I've been traveling around the country talking to, various conferences about the history of EMS. I was in Austin, Texas at the National Association of EMS Physicians a few months ago. Next week, I'm going to DC to talk with their EMS and fire. I did a podcast on the England Journal of Medicine. So really, what's happening now is the desires of my heart are being fulfilled, because that's what I want to accomplish, is to bring that part of history back into the forefront where it belongs.
Yeah, John, it must have been amazing to be there and watch things. I know it was hard, from conversations with you and reading the book, but God, you did some amazing things.
And you're absolutely correct. And one of the things that surprises me, even today, that boggles my mind, is so far ahead of our time that we were back then. And as I try to retrace that historical perspective, even though I'm talking to you right now, it's not necessarily about me as an individual so much as it is about an organization of visionaries that stepped up and had a compassion and empathy for a community that was somewhat underserved and neglected. And they wanted to change the trajectory of medical care in that community because we had to rely on the police. And unfortunately, during those times back in the early 60s, the Hill District had what I would call somewhat controversial relationship with police officers. And probably even today, very few people can imagine a police wagon pulling up to your residence and two officers coming in and most of the time walking you out to the vehicle and placing you in the back on a canvas cot, and both officers getting up front and transporting you to the emergency room. And, you know, the issue concerning that is in the Hill District, the police had, you know, they had decisions to make. Whether they wanted to come or not, how long it wanted to take them to get there, or even if they wanted to transport you to the emergency room. So we were plagued with that type of mentality. So imagine you being in the back of this police wagon that perhaps had transported a prisoner to jail or a drunk to jail or what have you, and you laid back there on a canvas cot by yourself. And if something happened to you, i.e. you stopped breathing or your heart stopped beating, there was no one back there to help you. So something had to be done. And these individuals, what I would call visionaries, came up with this vision. And it was a vision of a gentleman by the name of Phil Hallen. And he noticed that this organization in the Hill District, which was Freedom House, part of their duties were to deliver food and vegetables to the residents. And he came up with the idea that said, if this organization can deliver food, why can't they deliver medical care to this underserved community? And the board of directors at that time, which Phil was one of them, said, that's a great idea, but, you know, what do we do? How do we get this manifested? So he was at the time president of the Maurice Falk Medical Foundation, which contributed money to Freedom House, and he went to Presbyterian University Hospital, which is UPMC now, and met with their director, who introduced the board of directors to Dr. Peter Saffer, who at that time was head of the critical care medicine department as well as the anesthesiology department. And it was his vision to prove to the world that it's not how fast you got them to the hospital, but what was being done for them before they got there. Mm-hmm. But he was having trouble getting that concept out to the world or the country. So up comes this group of individuals with this need, and it was a golden opportunity for both ventures, and they kind of merged together. Dr. Saffer agreed to teach these individuals who were all Black, and that was one of the requirements at that time, that in order for them to allow Dr. Saffer to do it, each person he put into the class had to be Black, and he agreed to that. So once that agreement was in place, he in turn took roughly about 25 people and placed them into a training program that was the most intense that had ever been done in this country. They actually spent time in the intensive care unit, in the operating room, in the emergency room, in the obstetrics room, in the recovery room, even in the county morgue, undergoing anatomy and physiology. Mm-hmm. CPR was part of that. Mm-hmm. And once they completed roughly about 300 hours of training, they were placed into the streets to provide that care that they had learned in the hospitals at a person's home, at a job site, or on the sidewalk, or what have you. No one had ever seen a group of individuals do this before, let alone a group of Black men at that particular mm-hmm. time.
John, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So from the individuals that originally participated, did they welcome this idea with open arms, or was it a hard sell to become an ambulance attendant? I mean, let's face it, at that time, there wasn't a lot of glory to it. You know, there wasn't a lot of pluses. I mean, were people like, yeah, I want to be part of it? Or like, was it something you had to really kind of give them a really good sales pitch to get them on board?
And that's a great question. And that's exactly what Freedom House had to do. The individuals I would call a very unlikely group of individuals. They were ones who were unemployed or underemployed, and their mindset was somewhat different. I'm here, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, not working. And so they really didn't fit the normal mold of an employee. And that's what made this a unique challenge for Dr. Saffer, is he took individuals that somewhat by society's standards and were the least likely to succeed. And as I think about that statement, one of the things that I often think about is society made one mistake, is it didn't tell them. So they in turn, once they got into this class, kind of bought into this concept with open arms, because it was a job opportunity, number one. They were getting paid for training, so there was income coming in at that particular time. But it required a certain amount of perseverance, a certain amount of resiliency to accomplish this, because these individuals had never been placed into such a structured environment before. And that's what made it rather unique. But he was able to accomplish that. Not every person they put in that class was able to endure the intense training program. But once they were finished, they found out it was very successful, to the point that it became the norm, that they started making program after program. And that became the standard of training for the paramedics in the Hill District.
Yeah. Well, and the mindset at that time, even outside the city, was still, you call, we haul. I mean, I can remember 1986, one of my first conversations as a probationary member was with a gentleman who was first generation EMS in our community. And he gave me a lecture about, there's too many people trying to play doctor. He said, you're going to be successful at this. You go to the house, you pick up the patient, and excuse the expletive, but you run like hell to the hospital and you hope they're living when you get there. That was the mindset of what was, quote unquote, ambulance EMS in the day. So treating in the field, John, it was revolutionary and at any vein, let alone within your community, for sure.
And you're absolutely correct. And what you're talking about, Chuck, is the swoop and scoop mentality.
Yes.
And one of the things that the individuals from Freedom House had to deal with, one of the many, is they had to train the community itself on what to expect when we got there. Because like you said, I'm used to the police coming in, putting me in the back of a wagon and rushing me off to the emergency room. Here come these guys that look like me. All of a sudden they're playing around with the patient and trying to take vital signs on them and things like that. And there were times when I was there, the family member saying, why are you messing around with my loved one? Yes. Why don't you just pick them up and take them to the emergency room? Yeah. So they had to teach the community to expect a higher level of care that they were bringing to them. And that was one of the, challenges that they had at that time, in addition to teaching the emergency room. Was, like you said, the emergency room was not accustomed to someone coming in with an IV, or someone coming in, as I did, that was already intubated, or coming in and me telling you what the EKG read, and I've given you this medication and stuff. So it was a training process, both to the community and the medical community as well.
Yeah, and it's funny, even into the 80s and 90s, when I was at Presby and UPMC, gosh, we still had complaints because the ED staff would not listen to a good pre-hospital report. Right. We still didn't train the ED staff. I mean, it was, oh God, so frustrating. But tremendous opportunity to really improve care, right? The first real effort, and of course, Peter Saffer, like you said, I know that he was someone you would probably run through a brick wall for, because he was that type of guy. He was a larger than life figure who had, but also, he was a tough taskmaster. I mean, he, as a trainer, I'm sure he had high expectations of you all.
Yes, he did. He definitely did. And he, at the time, what I would call, he would push the envelope as far as he could take it. He didn't care what people thought or their impressions or perception. So the point I'd like to make in dealing with him on a one-on-one concept is I reported to the 10th floor of Presby's operating room and met him there. And we went there, and at the time, I didn't know why I was going there. And I had gone through this training with him, and we'd worked in anatomy labs and things like that. And he said, okay, let's go in. And we walked in, and it's amazing because when I opened the door with him in the emergency room, everything stopped. I mean, the OR technicians stopped doing what they were doing. The surgeon who was preparing the patient for surgery stopped what they were doing. And everybody stopped and they looked at me. And I'm standing there with the head of the department. And what I found out a short while later is the reason they were looking at me is the only time someone that looked like me entered that room was with a mop and a bucket. Mm. But I didn't have one. So with his, I would say, blunt way of doing things, he walked over to the anesthesiologist that was sitting at the head of the patient and said, get up. You sit down and intubate that patient. Mm. And I knew all these people were looking, but I didn't see them at that time. So I sat there, and you guys can recall they had amphitheaters during that time. So you had medical residents peering down on top of it, watching this surgical procedure. And I intubated the patient on the very first try. And ironically, we went from room to room that day, intubating unsuspecting patients that were being prepared for surgery. And little did I know, less than a week later, I would take that same skill out into the street and do it into a person's home. Remarkable. So it was amazing concept at that particular time.
Yeah. You know, looking back now, John, did you ever think that what you were doing would be so cutting edge and so impactful? You know, I can think back to, and I'm sure all of us here can think back when we started. I never dreamed that 36 years later, that I still would be in some part. And look, I don't, my age does not preclude me to do this too much, but we didn't realize what we were doing, you know, and now watching these kids do such amazing things out in the field. Did you ever think that you would be the blueprint for that? And how, when you reflect on that, thinking about that, isn't it amazing what you've been able to transplant into this iteration of what EMS is today?
And you're absolutely correct. It's a concept that at that particular time we were not looking at trying to make groundbreaking history or anything of that nature. We were, I would say, living in the moment, providing a service to an underserved, somewhat neglected community, not knowing that that would be the standard of care or pre-hospital care that this country as a whole would adopt. We were not running around saying, okay, we got to do this and do that. And you brought up the point that I know taking a patient into the emergency room and giving them an update on the patient and giving them a report and things like that, we were laughed at because they were not accustomed to doing that. So I had to transfer that anger, if you will, or disappointment or frustration into something positive. And that's what I was able to do, because I can recall going back and voicing my frustrations to Dr. Nancy Caroline, who was our medical director at that time. Why are we doing this? Nobody's going to listen to us. I mean, she didn't even listen to me. And she looked at me and says, okay, well, if you don't learn to speak the language of the emergency room, then no one will ever listen to you. Mm-hmm. You go back in there and find a physician. And I did that, and it was received a whole lot better during that time. But at that time, I didn't know that we were kind of setting a standard that would become the norm. You wouldn't dare expect to take a patient to the emergency room today and not give a report to the emergency room
Yeah,
staff.
that's right.
So you're absolutely right. I'm still in awe of some of the transitions that have occurred today that we did back then.
Well, John, in our conversations, and by the way, just to take a step back for our listeners out there, you may not be aware, and Chuck and I certainly appreciate this. This morning, we find ourselves in the presence of royalty because both Mr. Harvat and Mr. Moon were inducted in the first ever Western Pennsylvania Legends of EMS class, and Chuck and I we're thrilled to be able to join.
What a wonderful ceremony! Just absolutely amazing day.
Really appreciative. Appreciative.
It was amazing, and of course you both gave tremendous talks that were, as well as the other honorees that were filled with history and inspiration, insight, and also great vision, I think, into this profession that all of us have come to know and love. But John, you made a point during your presentation, and you and I chatted a little bit afterwards about this. We've got an issue in EMS. We have a recruitment and retention issue, and you have some tremendous insight into how it is we can go about solving that problem.
And that's an interesting point. And one of the things that I noticed when I worked for Pittsburgh EMS at that particular time, and we're going back to the early 70s, that the department itself lacked diversity, and it was somewhat exciting for me to move up in the ranks and get into leadership positions and things like that. But as I noticed, the department didn't reflect the community in which we served. And once I got to a position, and I made myself a promise that if I ever get to a position where I can change the trajectory of where Pittsburgh EMS was going at the time, I would kind of devote the rest of my career to doing that. So as I was going up to the ranks, I got into a position where I could kind of challenge the department on its hiring practices. And obviously it was met with somewhat resistance, and I expected that, but I was determined to kind of accomplish that goal. And fortunately for me, I was able to talk to the leadership of Pittsburgh EMS, who was the chief at that time, Robert Kennedy, and he understood what I was talking about. So he, in turn, agreed with me that the department did not reflect the community in which it served. And I was the chief supervisor at the time. He says, okay, it's your concept. You come up with how we're going to do it, and I will deal with the backroom politics of it. So I designed the very first diversity recruitment program for the city of Pittsburgh. And it became the norm of how we hired. So what I did is I formatted it the same way Freedom House did, where I went out into the community and I went to community centers and job fairs and churches and put on presentations about this as a career path. And basically, I was able to recruit individuals that had no idea or no concept what a paramedic was or what an EMT was, and place them into a training program, give them a salary, somewhat a stipend to go through the training of EMT. And once they completed that and moved up to the paramedic training, they got a bump in pay. And the good thing about that is I was able to get the department to guarantee them jobs, because Pittsburgh EMS had invested all this money into these individuals. You really didn't want them to get the training from you and go somewhere else or work for someone else. So they held job vacancies open for these individuals, and they could just make a smooth transition into that because their internship or their ride-alongs were all on Pittsburgh EMS's units. And that was very, very successful as far as the hiring, and every time there was openings, we kept the openings available until we could get enough and start a training program and doing that. You know, the unfortunate thing about that is, once I retired, the department kind of reverted back to its old ways, and which brings us into the numbers that we have now, with the lack of diversity, perhaps. And I can only relate to Pittsburgh EMS because I spent 34 years there, but they're somewhat dismal to say the least. Now I'm not this disgruntled employee or anything, because I love the department, I love the people that work there, and it will always have a special place in my heart. But we're talking about a different time frame. So right now, the department is tasked with changing its hiring format to try and reflect on the community in which it serves. And I would like to see basically all EMS systems around the country look at that as a format, because you have to invest in the community in which you serve, because that's where your allies are. And I think that's, once you do that, you'll kind of somewhat solve your diversity issues, you'll solve your recruitment and hiring problems, and things. It's going to take time, and there are going to be challenges and hurdles, and naturally I was met with those same things. But the more barriers and hurdles I ran up against, the more determined I became, because from where I sat at that time, failure was not an option with this program. Because if it had failed, I didn't want to hear the "I told you so." Right. So I made sure the individuals got through. I was their mentor. I was their motivator. Obviously, I was their boss. But I think the community as a whole has to start reinvesting into the communities in which it serves. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure it's easy to post on Facebook and TikTok and Snapchat and all these other social media posts that we're hiring and things like that. But if I don't look at those, then, I don't know. So I think basically we have to invest in the community in which you serve.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think it's a broad problem in healthcare in general.
Right.
Our healthcare systems generally do not reflect the diversity of the communities they serve, and not always, but mostly,
sure.
In my experience. And so, how do you do that? And you said something earlier on. You were talking about your experience in the OR, right?
Yes.
People expected you to be walking in with a bucket and a mop, and when we get people into healthcare, we get people into careers. It should be careers in healthcare. We find good people who are interested from the community, who are invested in the community. Let's give them an opportunity to have a career. And certainly EMS, all of us here on this call and many others, friends and colleagues, have had wonderful careers in EMS and enjoyed great benefits from that and are proud of it. And I think we need to find that group of people, that next wave, and find a way to get them in. And the other thing you said I thought was great too is, you served as their mentor, right? We've got to have good mentors to help these people be successful, get through the training, become good employees, serve the communities, those things.
And you're absolutely right. And the crowning moment for me, one of the many, is that there are people that are still with Pittsburgh EMS today that came in back in 1990 during the diversity recruitment program. And others have gone on to retire and collect a pension and move on to a different phase in their life where perhaps they would not have had that opportunity had we not opened the door for them.
John, if it wasn't all of us retirees here, or close to retirees, or whatever we call ourselves here, if there were a 20-something man or a young man or a young woman with us today, what would be your message to them to encourage them to take a leap and do? Because let's face it, the world today, being out there, the environments that they face, the challenges they face, isn't necessarily that much more exciting pay-wise than flipping a burger or working at Walmart. You know, our pay scale is kind of dismal. What would you say to someone if they were here today? Say, you got to do this. I know what I would say because it's been amazing. But how do we talk to this next generation and convince them to go out there and endure the conditions post COVID that exist today? How do we excite them? How do we motivate them? How do we encourage them?
And that's an interesting point, because right now, going on right now, there is a Freedom House 2.0 training program that's patterned somewhat after Freedom House, where you get, I would say, perhaps single mothers and perhaps unemployed males that really have no idea what they want to do or anything like that, and you kind of expose them, you kind of whet their appetite to this as a career. And once you've done that, you allow them to choose which direction they want to go. But it's our job to kind of expose you, to encourage you, to whet your appetite. Maybe I will, if I'm speaking next week or what have you, I would bring one of the paramedics that work there, or I would bring a vehicle, or, you know, like you said, maybe I'll tell you a story, some gory story or whatever the case is, but, and that may work in the opposite direction. But I think I would, you know, perhaps present this career path more or less in a passionate manner, as opposed to just a job.
Yes.
And so I would kind of get rather personal. Imagine your family member needing whatever type of care, or your loved one, and things of that nature. And you know, someone's going to grab hold of that. Everybody is not going to bite on this fish,
Right.
But if you can just get one or two or three people, you really accomplish your goal. And you know, whether we take it in consideration or not, just my sitting here talking to you guys gets the point out on how important this career is to people that otherwise don't know anything about it. And you know, I know I'm rambling, but years ago I taught a class in Duquesne, PA. And it was at a church, and it was CPR class, and I was really into it. And all of a sudden I noticed the group sitting there looking at me, and I said, well, am I going too fast? Is there something you don't understand? And things like that. They said, no, you're doing fine. We've just never seen a Black paramedic before. So I had to stop teaching the CPR class and kind of go into the historical perspective. And once you get into that part of this as a career path, because every job has a history. And that's what my motivation is I tell you the history of what I want you to become, then hopefully it'll excite you or whet your appetite to the point where you'll say, okay, well, at least let me try that and see what happens. And Freedom House 2.0 has been into existence for the last 3 or 4 years. It's expanding into Westmoreland County now. It started in the Hill District. It is expanded into Erie, PA, and obviously you're still having, you know, classes here. So the goal is to expose this career path to the community, and once you do that, they'll say, okay, well, there are someone out there that cares about whether I'm unemployed or whether I'm struggling here and there. So you bring that empathetic type of mindset to them, the compassion and the care that we all have displayed in this career path, and kind of expose them to it.
Yeah.
John,
No, that's great. Yeah,
that is extremely unbelievable. It's just phenomenal. John, I'm always charged with being the timekeeper of this group for some reason. So, but I must say, we could probably talk to you till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning about all these things. But
Okay.
obviously your time is precious, but I got to fast forward. Can
Sure.
you tell us a little bit about how the book came to be, and also some of the accolades and some of the uh, things that you've attended in recent months and years as a result? I think that is a story in itself, and we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you these questions before we close today.
Well, thank you for that. The book itself took about 4 years to complete, and the author is a good friend of mine. His name was Kevin Hazard. He was a paramedic in Atlanta, Georgia, and as he wanted to write this book about paramedics, someone mentioned to him, "Had you heard about Freedom House?" And he said, "No, I haven't." And he said, they told him, "Okay, well, you better do some research into that." And he mentioned to me that once he started Googling different parts of it and things, he said everywhere he turned, John Moon's name popped up. So he sent me an email and wanted me to sit down and discuss with him about the history of EMS and Freedom House. And it's ironic because I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. So we had a connection there. So as he was interviewing me for the book, I didn't know he was recording it. It was just a conversation like you and I are having right now. And once it came out, basically, it unveiled in Atlanta in Jimmy Carter Museum, and I happened to, be there. But the book itself, I didn't know the first 10 chapters would cover the life of John Moon. It was my concern to try to get the history of EMS out to the public. And obviously, once I read the book, I had to put it down on a number of occasions because it caused me to reflect back on my childhood growing up, and which was somewhat challenging. And as a result of that, it became rather emotional. So it took a while to finish reading the book, but I didn't have an idea that the book was going to become as successful as it has. It's a bestseller. There are some EMS systems around the country. It's required reading. The title of it is American Sirens, the first paramedic for Black men from the Hill District. And Kevin, he really did a lot of research into the book, but it has opened up doors and opportunities for me, obviously, to travel the country with him, to book signing events and things like that. Like I mentioned earlier, I had the opportunity to give a presentation in Austin, Texas. I was the keynote speaker for the 40th anniversary of the National Association of EMS Physicians, which Dr. Ron Stewart was the founder of. I also has, attended a lot of, podcasts. New England Journal of Medicine, I did a podcast there. One of the other crowning moments, probably 2 months ago, I was the honored guest of Congresswoman Summer Lee to attend President Biden's inaugural address in Washington, D.C. And that was an experience of a lifetime, to actually visit the Supreme Court and sit on the floor of where the Senate and the congressmen make laws and rules and things like that. In addition to that, there's a push right now to get Freedom House the Congressional Medal of Honor. And it was introduced in the House of the Senate, which was an honor as well. Not to mention, I'm a regular speaker at the, School of Public Health for the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University. So really, I've did a lot of traveling around the country, more or less exposing the country to the history of EMS, as well as here in Pittsburgh. So that's been one of the crowning moments of my career. And, as I think back on it, Gary, I can't help but think that all of the hurdles and barriers and disappointments and broken promises and setbacks that we went through at Freedom House to bring something to the forefront. And then I look at Pittsburgh EMS and I see the first African-American chief of Pittsburgh EMS in the 50-year history of EMS.
Yes.
And I turn around and I can smile
Mhm.
and say it was all worth it.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah.
So John and I agree, and I think she represents the department so incredibly well. So I think as an EMS community, we're all very proud of the fact that she's in that position.
Yes, indeed.
I'm gonna throw you a question, John. These are throwing you a question means you know the answer. So has this book of yours won any acclaim at all, John? Has anybody given you anything? I'm hoping you're getting my drift here.
I am.
Okay.
I am. You're absolutely correct. On one end, I can look at it as, well, what are you getting out of it? And the answer to that question is from a personal standpoint, absolutely nothing. Not one red penny or one red dime or anything. I get no financial compensations for it. The book sales obviously, or I guess astronomical. The drawback with that is I'm willing to accept that. That's okay, but because it gets the desires of my heart out to the world. Normally in the perfect world, you sign contracts and say, I get a piece of this action and a piece of that action and stuff like that. And maybe that's the way it should be. But to me, it's more rewarding to make sure that the world knows about this organization that's been dormant for well over 50 years. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not filthy rich or anything like that. I could use the money, but I think it's more important to me to get the word out. I'm on the speaking tour right now where I'm somewhat highly sought after. And there's compensation along those lines when I attend conferences to speak to audience and things like that. But it's nothing to retire on. But your point's very valid. Your point's very valid to the point that that's been the whole, I guess, persona of this story, that others somewhat benefit from it.
Sure.
More than the individuals that created the history.
Yeah.
And so, I understand your point. Your point's very valid.
You're quite a humble man. But back to that physical little statue thing that you got, John. What was that? Let our audience know, because I think that is incredible.
You're absolutely correct. And it's right upstairs in my bedroom right now, believe it or not. We, 2 years ago, WQED wanted to film a documentary about the history of Freedom House Ambulance Service. And it took roughly about a year and a half with a lot of interviews. I did roughly about 5 or 6 hours of interviewing. They came to my home and I took them around the Hill District and things like that. And they talked to a couple of other members. And this documentary was put out. And little did we know at the time that it was being considered for an Emmy Award. And last September, it was introduced at the film ceremony or something in Carlisle, PA, I think it was. and it actually won an Emmy. So it's an Emmy award-winning documentary called The First Responders, and it chronicles the history of Freedom House, where I'm giving an interview. They probably gave me more of the FaceTime than anything else, which is an honor. But usually when I go around locally, I take the Emmy with me, and I allow people to take pictures of it and things like that. So that's another testament to how important this part of history is. Right now, it's been picked up by PBS, so it's being shown around the country regarding the history of EMS. Tomorrow, the National Association of EMS Officials, who are already in town, will be honoring Freedom House. Tomorrow, as well as the Hill District Community Development Organization. So there are people from both the local, state, and federal government that will be in town honoring the legacy of Freedom House. So all of this is coming to fruition. The desires of my heart are manifesting itself right now. So, in addition to me receiving an honorary doctorate degree from the University of Pittsburgh, which I hadn't imagined in my wildest dreams, it's something to really reflect on. And I, as I mentioned earlier, all of this work and effort that has gone into the history of EMS as we see it today is finally coming to fruition, because you don't know where you're going until you understand where you came from. And that's the message I want the EMS practitioners to get out there and try and understand.
Well, and John, you mentioned earlier about the passion. I hope that there are young men and women in your community that will at some point either read the book, view the documentary, and say, I can do that. Like, I can be whatever I want to be because of guys like John Moon, who blazed the trail for me to whatever career path that is. Hopefully it's EMS, but you're a living testament to the fact that if you're passionate about something and you want to serve your community well, the pathway will lead upward however way the trajectory goes. I think it's just amazing, John, really.
And I was rather remiss, but Pittsburgh EMS has a Freedom House Academy as part of its hiring process, and they use the same format that the members of Freedom House did, and they went out into the community. So that class is scheduled to graduate in August, and there are positions waiting for them with Pittsburgh EMS.
That's great.
So things are turning, coming full circle right about now, and there's a lot of momentum behind this historical perspective of Freedom House. And as I'm sitting here talking to you all, I just can't thank you enough for this opportunity. I really can't, because as I keep mentioning, you're helping me fulfill the desires of my heart, and that's to get this part of history out to the world.
Well, you're quite welcome, John. We're amazed at the number of folks who tune into this podcast. So we surely hope that those will download and listen to it in their car at home. Will again hear your great message, and this has been a pleasure. And again, I'd love to keep you on here for another few hours, and because you have me pretty much spellbound at this point. I told John earlier, for you folks listening, John's a great speaker, but we should have really had his wife Brenda on, because she's equally as good.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
she's quite the treat. And if you ever have the chance to meet John, make sure you ask him where his wife is.
Where his wife is.
He is.
John has his own cheerleader, that's for sure.
Yes, he does. Yes,
Like
he
the
does.
card. She really is. I loved was talking to her. So anyway, but one more thing, John, and I think I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Next week being National EMS Week, do you have a message to the folks who are working out there in the trenches day in, day out?
Yes, and one of the messages I would like to get out to them is the job itself has its challenges, and you have to be willing to overcome those. You have to have the perseverance and resiliency to withstand those challenges. But on top of that, what made the job somewhat easier for me when I was working in the field is I looked at every patient that I transported or took care of as a member of my family. And when I went into someone's home, I was taking care of a member of my family. I was talking to a member of my family or my loved one. So if you take with you that concept that every time you go into a person's home, or whether you see them at work or on the street, that you're dealing with a member of your family, then you can't help but give them the best possible care that they could get.
Very well stated. Very well stated.
Yeah,
That's
amen.
for sure.
Amen. You know, John, it's funny. It's just like I can remember, like it was yesterday. And the first time I met you, it was in Lothar. You had come in off the truck to see Dr. Stewart about something, and I wanted to share this with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a young guy. I was a brand new paramedic. I had done my field training. I went to the centers program. I'd done my field training at Medic 2 when it was at 51 in Maytime.
Yes.
And, you walked in, and the level of professionalism and confidence and respect from everybody in the room. I mean, it was amazing to me as a young person. But also, you had that smile and that gleam in your eye, and I could tell you were enjoying what you were doing. So, thank you for the wonderful message. Thank you for all the years of service to the community and to the profession. And thanks for taking the time with us today. We are blessed to have this brief hour with you, and I know you're busy, but we're thrilled. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And you're welcome. It's an honor. And you know, I share your feelings because I could talk to you for 2 or 3 hours without a break. And I've done that before, believe it or not. I did a presentation with UPMC's Heart and Vascular Institute, and it was like a 4-hour Zoom meeting. But there was no breaks in there, so I could go on and on and on. But thank you for this opportunity. And like I said, that's not even enough because you're helping me fulfill the desires of my heart. And I can't thank you enough for that.
Oh, you're quite welcome, John. And we've had some great guests, but with all due respect to the good people we've had so far, I think we just had the creme de la creme here today. So
Yeah, amazing.
just really, really great talking to you. And, you know, if it was up to me, we'd keep going, but we're going to have to stop. So I will say again, thank you so much. And
Yes.
to Ed, who basically birthed this idea of let's see if we can get John Moon on one of our podcasts. Great idea, Ed. Great idea. And so thankful we were able to work out a date and time to do this, and something that will be out there for years to come on our podcast channel. So it's great. But in closing, with EMS week coming, to those providers in the field, thanks for all you do day in, day out. Christmas, New Year's, all through the year. And to the public, don't forget about these guys. Don't forget about these guys. They're in your worst hour. You don't have to buy them a sandwich or a coffee, but a thank you and a pat on the back goes a hell of a long way. So
Yes, it does.
with that being said, happy National EMS Week to everybody, and my best to all of you, having spent many years of my life, my professional life in EMS. I can tell you that you're always in my thoughts and prayers. So with that, I will once again thank John and Ed and Chuck for joining, and we'll see you again next time. And as we normally end, we'll just simply say, hey,
Be safe out there.
Be safe
Have a
out
great
there.
day.